All right, this is video number 5, and I'm going to continue talking about population dynamics of the great white shark. And in this video, I'm going to briefly discuss size ratios and sex ratio of the population. And I'm sticking to the sample that we took along the southern African coastline. I don't want to start discussing California, and I don't want to discuss Australia, etc., because I'm not an expert in those areas, and therefore it's not authentic. There's other scientists like Peter Klimley, there's Sean von Sommerman, Peter Pyle, Scott Anderson, that know a lot more about great white sharks in California than I know. And you got Rodney Fox and his son, I can't remember his name. You got Rocky Strong, etc. They know a lot more about great white sharks in Australia than I know. So I'm going to stick to what I know, because then that's the best information I can give you. But we looked at size ratio and sex ratios of the great white sharks. And when it came to the size ratio of the population, first of all, we found a very large size mix of a population along our coastline. We found great white sharks from 1.5 meters long, which is young of the year, to 6 meters long, which are massive adult animals. So we found a huge size mix of the population, which is good because that indicates a healthy population. Things have changed now, but I'm talking about during the 90s. We found that it was a healthy population. Something has taken place over the last years, which has destroyed that healthy population. And our population of white sharks along the South African coastline, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as other people that are doing research on them, is not healthy anymore. It seems like the population has dropped substantially. I mean, I have personally worked with at least 5,000 individual great white sharks, and now it's estimated that there's less than 1,000 great white sharks along our coastline. I don't know if I agree with that completely, but what I do agree with is that the population does seem to have diminished, which is very concerning. But we found a very healthy size mix of the population. The only part of the population which may not have been healthy during our research was the absence of young of the year. We did find young of the year, but not as many as we expected. But I cannot say why we didn't find as many young of the year as we expected. Perhaps it's natural. Perhaps it was fine. Perhaps there's no problem. There was no problem in the population. But what we did find, which was very interesting, is that as you move down the coastline, our coastline starts from Mozambique. Mozambique is the border between South Africa and Mozambique, of course. So we got a border. So South Africa goes up into Natal on the east coast, and then it hits Mozambique, and then Mozambique is another country. Up in Natal, the average size of the great white sharks was 2.4 meters in length, the average size. All right. But as you came down the coastline, further and further south towards Mossel Bay, Algoa Bay, then Mossel Bay, the average size became larger. Then you got to Straits Bay and Gansbaai, where the average size was very similar and larger, substantially larger than up in Natal. And then when you got down to False Bay, you got the really big sharks. You still got small sharks. You still found small animals and some juveniles and subadults, but you found a larger percentage of big sharks, big adult great white sharks in False Bay. So you can see that there was a disparity down the coastline, but it's natural. It's obviously natural for some reason. So the average size up in Natal was 2.4 meters, and the average size down in the Cape, in the areas we worked in the Cape, was 3.4 meters length, which is a big difference. And that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. Why the size changed significantly from the northern part of our country down to the southern part of our country, I don't know. I'm not sure. We can only speculate. One of my speculations, or one of my guesses, is that perhaps the great white sharks are dropping their pups further up, maybe off Kenya, maybe off areas in Mozambique, and these white shark pups are going down onto the reefs, and they're feeding on octopus and squid, and they're feeding on reef fish, easily accessible prey items. And then as they grow, they start moving further south, and they get to a size where they can start attacking harbor porpoises and dolphins, and eventually they get to a size where as they move further down south, they can start attacking things like seals, large seals, small seals, etc., etc. So that is the size mix of the population that we found, okay, the size ratio. Then we were looking at the sex ratio of the population, and it's also quite different. Up in Natal, in the northern part of our country, the sex ratio was 1.4 females to 1 male. However, down in the south of the country, the Cape Coast, the sex ratio was, or is still, roughly around 3 females to 1 male. And again, I'm not sure. I don't think anybody knows why there's such a disparity in the sex ratio from one part of the country to another part of the country. But generally, in all parts of the world, the females outnumber the males. However, we did find during our research period, during our sample period, we did also find some anomalies that we're not sure about. There were periods where we found almost exclusively females. Almost every 9 out of 10 sharks that came to the boat were females. And then there were other periods where 9 out of 10 sharks that were at the boat were males. But so you had these periods where there was predominantly males and then predominantly females, but then you also had these periods where there was a mix of males and females, and then ultimately when we put it all into a box and we shook it up and we looked at the averages, there was 3.4 females to each male. So there are a lot more female white sharks out there than male great white sharks for some reason. Don't ask me why, because I can't answer you. So in any case, it's a short video just discussing size and sex ratios, and we shall now move on to the next video. Information will come out later on as we go on. Information will come out about why, maybe, I don't know. But things like that don't really worry me. If we find that there were only females on our coastline, then be concerning. If we found that there were only males along our coastline, then perhaps it would be concerning. But we didn't. There's a mixture of males and females, and there's also a good mixture of size of the population. But unfortunately, as I said, there seems to be a problem now. And just on that note, before I carry on to the next video, there's been a lot of news around the world because South Africa has always been the primary area for great white sharks, the most prolific area in the world for great white sharks. It's incredible. I mean, even in Mossel Bay right now, we've got a strike rate of 98%. 98% of the time when we go out looking for great white sharks, we find great white sharks in Mossel Bay. But False Bay, which was prolific with great white sharks, the last several years has had almost no great white sharks. And now it seems slowly the great white sharks are moving back. Gansbaai, where you could very often walk on the backs of great white sharks from the island to shore, there were so many of them. As I say, there was one morning where we identified 33 different great white sharks in one morning. And another day I tagged 18 great white sharks in one morning. So it was a prolific area for great white sharks. And suddenly they've disappeared, they vanished for like 2 years. And studies, a friend of mine, Sarah Andreotti, she did a study, and the numbers she came out with, the population number of great white sharks she came out with was literally 10% of what my experience is of great white sharks. She came out with a number that said there was possibly 500 great white sharks along our entire southern African coastline. And when she came out with that data, I was like, this is bullshit data. This is bad science. And I still think her numbers are very conservative. However, I do have to swallow my words because there has been a decline in the population, definitely, and she's correct on that. But I have personally seen at least 5,000 great white sharks, individual great white sharks, and I've seen hundreds. I mean, we would see hundreds in 1 year. We'd see, in half a year, we'd identify 500 different great white sharks, and now they're saying, Sarah's saying that there's possibly only 500 great white sharks along the whole coastline. I don't agree with that completely, because in Mossel Bay, we see on average, and it hasn't changed, we've seen on average about 200, 240 great white sharks each year. Anyway, that's what I've got to say on size and sex ratios, and we shall now move on to the next video. Thank you very much.